17. When exercising the muscles in one's back, it is important, in order to maintain a healthy back, to exercise the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally. Okay, really? After all, balanced muscle development is needed to maintain a healthy back, since the muscles on opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment and protect the spine. And then, so I wasn't sure if there was even logic there. I thought that might have just been like fact. But the question says, which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? It's an assumption question. And if it's an assumption question, then that means there was evidence and a conclusion. So now, before I even get into whether this was a necessary assumption question or a sufficient assumption question, I'm going to first find the evidence and find the conclusion and make sure I understand what they're trying to prove here. So I think they're telling me what to do. I actually think the conclusion is the first sentence. I was willing to accept that as a premise. It sounds very reasonable. But the rest of their argument tries to prove that, right? We see the word since, which means here's evidence. I think the argument goes, the muscles on opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment and protect the spine. So balanced muscle development is needed to maintain a healthy back. So when exercising muscles in one's back, it's important, in order to maintain a healthy back, to exercise the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally. And I think, rearranging the argument, I think I have an objection, which is, do I have to exercise the sides equally in order for them to pull equally in opposing directions? What if that's not true? What if exercising just one side of your back leads to muscle development on both sides of your back? That's absurd. I don't think that's at all true in real life. But what if? I see that as a hole in the argument. They didn't state that. I think they needed to state that. Or I think it would help their argument to state that. When you get to law school, you're going to take a class called Legal Writing and Research in your 1L year probably. Legal Writing and Research, you're going to have a TA who's going to tell you that you're leaving shit out of your brief. And I would have, because this argument, it sounds pretty damn good. But you show this to a legal writing TA, and the legal writing TA immediately goes right to, hey, you didn't say that exercising the muscles on just one side of the back won't lead to balanced pulling in opposite directions. That's the missing piece of the argument. Now, which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? Minda, what type of question is that?
A necessary assumption.
It's a necessary assumption question. How do you know it's a necessary assumption question?
The word required.
Yeah, required. Which one of the following is an assumption required, i.e. necessary? So this is a necessary assumption question. All right, you're doing good so far. What do you think? What are you thinking on a necessary assumption question?
That if it's false, it makes the argument absurd.
Very good. We're looking for the one that, if false, makes the argument lose. We're looking for the necessary one. Having your head attached to your body is necessary for life. If your head is chopped off of your body, you lose. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the one here that, if false, makes us lose. That's a necessary assumption. Now, I've already stated the missing piece of the argument. Assumption just means missing piece. Necessary assumption means the missing piece that, if false, makes you lose. So I've already stated the missing piece as, hey, in order to make it so that the muscles on the opposite sides pull equally, you have to exercise both sides equally. And yeah, I think that's a necessary assumption of the argument. If that's false, I think the argument fails. So let's see. A. Did the argument assume that muscles on opposite sides of the spine that are equally well developed will be enough to keep the back in proper alignment? It's not what I predicted. And even if that's false, it doesn't ruin the argument. If A is false, it becomes You know, it's not true that muscles on opposite sides of the spine that are equally well developed will be enough to keep the back in proper alignment. And if you said that as an objection, I think the speaker could go, well, yeah, there's no guarantee that the back's going to stay in proper alignment, but in order to give yourself the best chances of having a healthy back, you need to exercise the muscles on both sides equally. Do you see that? I'm looking for one that, if it's false, it gives the speaker, like, nowhere to go. Where the speaker would just have to be like, oh, you're right, you ruined my argument. B, does it have to be true that exercising the muscles on opposite sides of the spine unequally tends to lead to unbalanced muscle development? That's the answer. If it's not true that exercising the muscles on opposite sides of the spine unequally tends to lead to unbalanced muscle development, then what the fuck is this argument even talking about? The argument's trying to prove that you have to exercise equally on both sides or else you're going to have all this bad shit happen to you. And so that means that B has to be true or else the argument makes no sense at all. If B is false, the argument fails, so B is a necessary assumption of the argument for number 17. That make sense? Anybody want to hear about C or D or E? Real life, I would always read all 5 answers, of course, but we can move on.